Good morning. Okay, so here is our do now. You know what you're supposed to do for this, so you should have your do now paper out and should be quietly working on answering these questions. You can pause this video so that you have time to go through all the questions, and in about 5 minutes we'll go over the answers. So take out your do nows, you can pause this video, and then we'll go over the answers after you've had a couple minutes to jot down your answers. So we've been learning about adaptations and how that relates to an organism's environment. Remember, in an ecosystem, you either have abiotic factors, those non-living things like temperature, sunlight, water, and then those living things like predator, prey, competition, mutualism. So in this case, a frog has blue skin to scare off predators. Is this an adaptation for a biotic or an abiotic factor? So hopefully we can go through this together, where you have the frog as the organism. It has blue skin, that's its adaptation. Why does it have blue skin? To scare away predators. And now you have to think, are predators living or non-living? A frog has blue skin, the adaptation. Why? To scare away predators. Predators in its environment is a living thing, so hopefully you wrote that it's biotic. Frogs have 3 organs to help them breathe air. Crazy. They have lungs that will help them. They can breathe through their skin. Their mouth can help them breathe as well. So it's 3 organs is their adaptation. Places are low with oxygen, so they need to have many organs that can get that air. And this adaptation is for an abiotic factor, since oxygen or air is not a living thing. Components of a frog's niche. Hopefully you could look in your notes. If not, maybe you remembered that a niche is the role an organism plays in its environment. So for the frog, like, where does he fit in with? He fits in with like the insect eaters. He fits in by, he's prey to like snakes. He lives in wooded regions. So his role, or where he fits in, is like in wooded or wetland areas. He belongs to the group of organisms that eat insects. So any of these would be great. He belongs with amphibians. Okay, so moving on. We're going to update our table of contents. So for sure, we should pause the video here and allow you to update your table of contents, write it down, and then we'll hand out both the worksheet and the packet to you. So now would be a good time to pause. And then hopefully you have numbered your pages, so 49 all the way through 54. And we are going to start with the Keystone Species worksheet. So you should have out that single sheet worksheet. And a keystone species is a species where it's really, really essential to the ecosystem. Basically, if you're going to get rid of one species, don't make it a keystone species. If you get rid of this plant, animal, fungi, whatever it is, it will basically destroy the food web. The habitat could even change. So we're going to go through these slides, and like I said, you should have your worksheet out, so find that keystone species one. So the first part of your notes is to write the definition. A keystone species is a species that is very important to the health and interactions in its ecosystem. So like I said before, basically if you remove a keystone species, you will see a huge impact on the rest of the animals and plants and organisms in that environment, and you could even see the habitat switch to a different habitat, and I'll explain that with some examples. You might have heard of a keystone before in social studies. In social studies, it's the physical stone that kind of holds up that archway, and if you removed that stone, things would collapse. So similarly in ecology, if you removed that organism, problems would happen. So in your notes, you should have written the word keystone and the word ecosystem, and now I'm going to show you some examples. So starting with the elephant likes to live in a savanna, which looks like this. So as you can see, savannas are mostly flat. They have low lying grass, but they also have just a few trees. And that's important because elephants, like zebras and gazelles and lions and giraffes, are all adapted to this savanna environment. And what elephants do is accidentally they step on the little seedlings of trees. So if there's a tree nearby and the tree lets its seed down and the seed is sprouting and it's like, I'm gonna be a tree, the elephant steps on it and prevents the savanna from turning into a forest. Without elephants, seeds would be able to grow into trees, and then you wouldn't have the savanna anymore, you'd have a forest. And giraffes and zebras and lions and all of those creatures are not adapted to a forest. Can you imagine a giraffe trying to navigate through that, or a lion trying to hunt? Not as easy as what they're used to. So a elephant is a keystone species because it keeps the habitat a savanna. Without the elephant, the whole entire ecosystem would shift to another one, and the animals and plants living in the savanna would not do well. Another example is the sea stars. So sea stars you can find, hopefully if you've gone tide pooling. If you haven't, check out when our tides are low and go find some cool creatures. We have barnacles and mussels and sea stars and sea anemones and slugs and all these cool things in the tide pools. And when you have a sea star present, it actually allows a whole bunch of organisms to coexist. Like you'll see really wonderful tide pools with lots of different animals and like algae inside of it. But if you get rid of the sea stars, like there was this like wasting disease that was kind of killing a bunch of them off. If you get rid of them, then all of a sudden the tide pools on all of those rocks, it's basically all just mussels. And mussels aren't very diverse. So if you get rid of one organism, the sea star, it makes it so that all the other animals in that area can't live there and that the mussels just take over. So sea stars are keystone species because they prevent mussels from overpopulating. Without them, there would be no diversity. So we have our elephants. They make the habitat stay a savanna. The sea star is a predator keystone species because it keeps the prey population in check. Sea otters we'll talk about in a second, and they're also predator keystone species. And then prairie dogs, they like to live in little burrows, like tunnels underground. And so they build that own little habitat of tunnels underground, and if you get rid of the prairie dogs, there's nothing to make those holes, and so the animals that rely on living in those holes would die and not have a place to live. So these are keystone species. I would put at least one of them down on your notes, so I don't know, maybe jot down elephant and sea star or sea otter. Even though we haven't talked about it yet, it's on the next slide. So write down an example. So why are they important? Hopefully you've heard me say this multiple times, but they keep the food web intact and the ecosystem healthy. So in our examples, you can see that if you remove just this one singular organism, it can have a huge impact on the ecosystem. So you should be writing this down on number 3. In the example that I have here, sea otters, super cute. I got some photos for you. So sea otters, oh, are the really cute furry ones, and they are a keystone species because they eat sea urchins, and I'll go through why that's important in a second. So here is a sea otter eating some sea urchins, and sea urchins like to eat kelp. So if you're unsure what kind of habitat these two live in, they live in the kelp forest. So we've talked about Garibaldi and seals and all these different creatures. Look at how many different fish like to live there. So in the kelp forest, there obviously needs to be kelp. Kelp is eaten by sea urchins. So these guys eat kelp, and sea otters eat the sea urchins. So in this picture, you can see that when the sea otter is present, the sea urchin's population is kept in check. It's kept from going too large. And so if you have the sea otter, there's only a few sea urchins, and that means the kelp is pretty stable. They're there, the fish can live there, the seals can live there, it's all a happy ecosystem. However, if you get rid of the sea otter, which is what we did when we hunted them for their pelts or their fur, without the sea otters there, the sea urchins are super happy. The sea urchins are like, yes, there's nothing to eat us. And so they populate like no other. They go crazy with the eating, and all of a sudden your kelp forest is no longer a kelp forest. You don't have any kelp left. So I can show you what happens. When the sea otter is present, the population of sea urchins are kept in check, which means the kelp is fine, and lots of these fish and other animals get to live there. When you get rid of the keystone species, the sea otter, the sea urchins are able to populate without any limit. They eat all of the kelp, which means that all the other organisms that depended on that habitat will die off too. So you can see that the food web collapsed. That's what we call it. Like if you have a deck of cards that you stacked up kind of in a pyramid shape, like playing cards like ace of spades and jack of diamonds, and you pulled the bottom card from the triangular stack, you know how all the cards would collapse? That's kind of what happened here. We pulled the keystone species out and the whole food web collapsed. I'll show you what it looks like. So here's a healthy one, kelp forest, and then here is an urchin barren. An urchin barren is what it sounds like. It's when all of the urchins have taken over and made the water and land really barren without any plants or algae or other animals. You can see it's lacking in diversity. It's only sea urchins. Okay, so for question number 4, I'm going to give you a moment to answer this one. What happens to the food web once sea otters are hunted and removed? So you can pause this, and you can even talk over question number 3 and 4. Okay, so to go over the answers, what happens to the food web? Hopefully you said something like how the food web collapsed because the sea urchins overpopulated without their predator present. The food web collapsed because their predator wasn't present to keep their sea urchin population in check. There's 3 types of keystone species. We've talked about 2 of them so far. So you have the predator keystone species. They're the ones that eat to control a prey's population. So remember, the sea otter controlled the sea urchin population, which made sure then that the kelp forest stayed a kelp forest, and that the kelp was still there for other animals to eat. The sea star also controlled the population of mussels. If you got rid of the sea star, then the mussels would overpopulate and no other animals would be able to live there. Then you have ecosystem engineers, which is like the elephant. So the elephant is in charge of keeping the savanna a savanna, and the prairie dog is in charge of making the tunnels for other animals. So without these ones, you wouldn't have the tunnels, and you wouldn't have the savanna, you'd have a forest. Kind of similar to the sea otter with the kelp forest, but these guys, these engineers, aren't eating anything. It's that they are kind of managing the landscape. The last kind, and this is what you need to write in your notes for number 5, is mutualists. So mutualists, we've already learned about them. For mutualism is like bees. They work with flowers. They have a mutualistic relationship. There's other pollinators like birds and bats. So this flying fox bat is a keystone species because it is a pollinator, and I would like to show you how large they are. Okay. One time a bat hit me in the head, and I cannot imagine what it would have been like if it was a flying fox bat. But you can see how huge they are. Here's a picture compared to a human. And we'll get to do some research on a keystone species, so perhaps you'll choose to look at this bat. Anyway, so The reason that the bat and the bees are keystone species is because without them, the plants would not be able to be pollinated, which means they wouldn't reproduce, which means you wouldn't have like fruit or vegetables. And as you know, herbivores and then the rest of us all depend on plants being pollinated. So just to talk through each of the three kinds one more time, we have predators, which are like sharks. So sharks eat the old and like fish and sea turtles that are about, and so these sea turtles, if they didn't have a predator, they would just multiply, have so many sea turtles that would eat all of the seagrass, and all of the animals that relied on seagrass wouldn't have any food to eat. So why are sharks considered a predator keystone species as opposed to the engineer kind, like the elephants? And then also, what would happen if sharks were removed? So pause this video again, answer the questions, maybe talk about it as a class, and then we'll go over the answers. Okay, hopefully you said that sharks are considered the predator kind because they're doing the eating. They eat the sea turtles so that the sea turtles don't overpopulate and eat all the seagrass. They also control it so that there's not too many fish about. If the sharks were removed, you probably should have said something about how the food web would collapse. Okay. On the other hand, another example of an ecosystem engineer, on top of the elephant and the prairie dog, are beavers. So I just want to show you what some beavers look like. They have cool teeth. They're kind of cute. Let's see. Beavers have orange teeth, like this. And as you probably know, they are known for making these dams out of trees. So this one's cute, pulling some sticks over to make its dam. So what beavers do is they live along rivers, and when they build their dams out of parts of trees, they allow that river to slow down and create like lakes and wetlands. So the dam diverts the water and it creates these, it literally is what it sounds like, a wetland. So land that is wet is a place where you would see a lot of like birds, and as you know, lakes are different than rivers, so a lake environment is where lots of animals would like to live, and they don't want it to be a river. So if you have a beaver, you're able to have these wetland habitats, and you're also able to have these lakes. So without the beaver, the ecosystem would return to a river and it would no longer be inhabitable by wetland species or by lake animals. So beavers are considered an ecosystem engineer because they are the ones changing the river by damming it. So you should write down for number 8 that beavers are the ecosystem engineer kind because they are basically engineering the habitat. They're changing the river by building the dams. If you remove the beavers, then you would have the river return back to how it used to be, speeding up and breaking the dams, and then there wouldn't be habitat for those animals that like the lake and like the wetland. So for number 9, if you got rid of beavers, the rivers would return and it would ruin or get rid of the habitat for wetland animals and for lake animals. The last category is the mutualists, and we talked about this already, but bees and other pollinators like bats and birds will pollinate their plant and then they get food or like sugars from their plant, so it's a mutual relationship. Without them, then the plants wouldn't be able to reproduce and there wouldn't be enough producers for herbivores and us to eat. So the 2 examples, you could pick birds, you could pick bats, you could pick bees, but put two of them down. And then I'm just going to stick with bees. So for example, for number 11, the bee and the flower both benefit from their interaction because the bee pollinates the plants. And as you know, plants are the producers and they're the base of our food web, and so they keep our food web healthy. So I have, for example, the bee and the flower both benefit from their interaction. The bee helps its ecosystem by pollinating plants that are the producers in our food web. Remember how I told you that in some countries they don't have bees anymore, so it's someone's job with like a Q-tip to go pollinate all of the plants, like dip pollen on a Q-tip and then stick it on each flower. So thank goodness we have mutualists like bees to do that for us. Okay, and this is just the last example of a plant keystone species. We don't talk about plants enough. So any of these are great examples that you could write on your question for your worksheet. We have mangrove trees, we have seagrass, and we have reefs, which aren't technically a plant, but nevertheless. All of these basically keep the water clear or provide a habitat for fish. So the mangrove trees hold the sediment and the mud, same thing with the seagrass. Like if you have a river, you have mud on the sides and the plant roots are holding it there. Kind of like for our Montecito debris flow, plants hold the mud in, and that debris flow would not have happened if all of the roots of the plants weren't destroyed. Right before the debris flow, as you know, there was the fire that got rid of the plants, and now without plants, all that mud can just wash away. So in this example, without seagrass, you would have the mud just slipping into the water, and it would make it all muddy, and fish don't like to live in that. In the trees, there's big roots that the fish can hide in. So for 12, you can pick any of those three. I just went with seagrass. So if you want to pick that one, you can pick that one too. And then for 13, how does it help the ecosystem stay healthy? Hopefully you remember that it keeps kind of the water clear and it holds the mud onto the sides so that the reef and water can be clean and not super muddy. It filters out silt, it holds on the mud, it keeps that ecosystem healthy for the fish. So this next step in a moment is going to be you looking into a keystone species. So let me just show you what the website looks like. So you don't need to get them out this second, just look for a moment, but you'll be on a website that looks like this. And it might take a moment to load, and that's okay, but it has all of these different animals around the world. So if you wanted to look into a shark, it's trying to show you where they're located, so the map is not showing up currently for me, but don't worry. The gray wolf, cool. Largemouth bass, blue crab. We already did the beaver, so maybe don't pick the beaver. We also already did the sea star and we did the sea otter. So it would be more interesting if you read more into other animals. If you like Pokemon, this is a Pika, like Pikachu. So you're going to click one, and then you'll just read a little bit about them and answer the questions as you go. So cute. Let me show you an example before you do this on your own. So if I chose keystone species number 1 to be the sea otter, I would write sea otter. You are not picking sea otter because that's my example. Where does it live? Northern Pacific Ocean. I get this from the website. Its role is that it keeps the population of sea urchins in check. And what would happen if it were removed? Well, the urchins would destroy the kelp forest, and then it would ruin the food web and the diversity would decrease. So that's my sea otter one. My next example, which means you cannot do this one, is the purple sea star, since you have to research 2 keystone species. Where does it live? It lives on the west coast of North America. Oh, I found out that without this top predator, the tide pools would be dominated by mussels, and so therefore it's a predator keystone species. Keeps things in balance. So what you're going to do in a moment is you're going to research your own keystone species. Hold on one more second. So just so I can talk you through the rest of the day. So you're going to research 2 species on your own, and then you're going to get your break, and then we're going to do some stations. So let me, just because I'm not there, can I explain this to you really quick? So after you research your keystone species, you'll have your break, and then we'll come back and we'll start our packet. So we won't complete the whole packet today, and that's totally fine. I don't expect you to. We're going to be divided into 3 different groups, and it's just going to be your columns. So like column 1 closest to the window is going to be the station number 2 group. So any student seated closest to the window, you're going to be in one group. You're going to start with station 2. The middle column, you're going to be a second group, and you'll start at station 3, and we'll go through this again. And then if you're on the wall side, you're going to be at station 4 to begin with. If you're in the very back, go with the group that's closest to you. So if you're closest to the window, you're with the window group. And basically, you won't need me to tell you this because we can pause this and you can read where you're supposed to go. But station 2, you're going to watch a little video, and you're going to head towards the back of the classroom in those back rows and watch it and answer some questions. Station 3, you're going to read one story from these awesome island books that we have. You're the first people to get to use them, so please treat them with respect. Those books are on the side counters, which means if you are in this station, I want you to stand up and read them at the counter. It's good for us to stand up. So if you're at station 3, you'll be either on the window side or the wall side reading a book, one story. The packet that we handed out has the page numbers. You get to choose one of them. And then station 4 has a list of assignments that you should complete. So if you are starting with station 4, you're just going to take the front rows of the class, sit somewhere towards the front, and you're just going to work quietly on some work. I'm thinking the stations will be about 15 minutes at the most, probably. And then we'll switch after 15 minutes to a different station, but it's okay if you don't get through everything. So there's 3 different groups: the window side group, the middle column group, the wall side group. The window side group, I'd like you to please start in the back watching the video when we do this. The middle group, I'd like you to start on the side counters reading a book. And then station 4 people, that's the wall side group, you're going to go fill the front rows and just start working on assignments. Your packet explains it. I trust that you can read, but that's what we're doing for the rest of the day. So right now, I'm going to go to this. It's the QR code is on your worksheet, so you can scan your QR code. It's on your worksheet. Fill it out. The sub will give you maybe like 10 minutes at about, and then you can have your break. And you know how that works. Your sub will help you with that. And then here's this that you can pause and do. All right. I miss you. Have a good rest of your day.